Hey guys, I want to talk about a new study that came out. I was reading the latest issue of Mass, MASS. This is a publication from Eric Helms, Dr. Mike Zordos, and Greg Knuckles. By the way, if you guys aren't signed up for it, you're missing out on awesome stuff. So basically, just real quick, they take any study that's kind of relative to strength and body composition research, and they break it down so that the average person can understand it and apply it to their own training. And it's really awesome. And if you guys want to learn more, you can click the link in the description. Yes, I get a finder's fee. I do not feel bad about it because it's an amazing resource. I read this every month for me. So because I don't have time to go through every single study in depth, and I trust these guys to do it right. So it's an unbelievable resource. But there was a study that was done in trained individuals, and I thought it was really interesting. And Eric Helms did an amazing job breaking it down. Basically, they looked at the recovery from a session of high volume, lower load, so 8 sets of 10 at 70% of a 1 rep max, resting 75 seconds between sets, versus a lower volume, high intensity group, which was 8 sets of 3 reps at 90% of a 1 rep max, resting 3 minutes between sets, and looking at what it did to soreness, markers of recovery, strength recovery, muscle damage, inflammation, all these sorts of biomarkers. And they found what I think most people would expect, and that's that the high volume session actually caused a lot more damage, a lot more inflammation, and it took longer to recover from compared to the high intensity session. Now, these findings may surprise some people. They may not surprise some people. So basically, the lighter weight group, had more muscle damage. Now, some people will take that and say, well, that means that they had better muscle growth. That's not necessarily true. Damage is not necessarily equated to growth. Now, there are some benefits to muscle damage and inflammation in terms of the repair processes, but just completely associating damage with muscle growth is not correct. That being said, there are places in your training for both high intensity and high volume. However, one of the things that Eric Helms did a great job of making sure he mentioned was that a lot of people, of all the parameters that we can measure that associate with muscle growth, volume, which is quite simply number of sets times the number of reps times the weight, that is what volume is. Volume is most closely associated with muscle hypertrophy. Despite that, people have taken this, and I've been one of the main proponents of volume, but I've also been careful to say that you want to progress on the minimum volume that you can make progress on. And there's a couple different reasons for this, and the study highlights one of those reasons. That's because if you do a session that's so difficult, so muscle damaging, it will negatively impede subsequent sessions and actually may impede the overall volume that you can have in a training cycle. Let me give you an example. Let's say this same study would have done 5 sets of 8 with the same at 70%, and and these people could have recovered maybe 30-40% faster, right? Well, then they could have more sessions where they could do more weight with more volume overall over the course of a mesocycle, over the course of several weeks, and actually have a greater overall growth response compared to coming in hammering one session and then being so wrecked that they can't effectively train for the next week. So that's one aspect to consider. Another aspect to consider is that high volume is relative to the individual. So someone who is a beginner, high volume for them may be 4 sets a week for something like squat. That might be high volume. For somebody who's been training for 15 years, 25 sets a week might be high volume for squat. It just depends. It depends on what your training status is, how advanced you are, and the kind of volume dosage that you require to make progress. A great example of this would be a comparison of, say, myself and Ryan Doris. When I first squatted 295 kilos or 650 pounds, I was probably doing, near the end there, probably 45 to 50,000 pounds of volume a week, squatting 3 times a week, anywhere from, I would say, 3 to 6 or 7 sets per session. Probably somewhere close to 15 to 20 sets a week. Ryan was able to get up to a 644 pound squat, squatting twice a week at about half the number of sets that I was. For him, that volume was still high volume because it was sufficient to elicit an adaptive response. Okay? If I tried to do that volume, I might not have that response because I was adapted to a greater amount of volume, and thus for me to continue to make progress would require additional dosage of volume. But you do not just want to add volume for the sake of adding volume. A great example of this is there was a study where they looked at German volume training, which again, if volume is the closest thing associated with growth, I mean, why don't we just do a bunch of volume? Let's do 10 sets of 10, right? Well, there's a few problems with this. Those people were so wrecked that they could not, that they just didn't recover well, okay? And they actually found, so 10 sets of 10, they found that the people doing 5 sets actually got better results. Not because the volume was bad inherently, but because doing that much volume got them so overreached that they could not recover for subsequent sets and their workouts became ineffective. Okay? You always have to keep in mind that you're not just looking at one training session. You're looking at you need to keep in mind your overall arc of your training. So you want to be high volume for you, but what's high volume for you is not going to be necessarily high volume for somebody else, or might be way high volume for somebody else. But you never want to cross the barrier, at least in the long term, where volume is so high that it consistently negatively impacts recovery and you cannot effectively recover from session to session. Now, you may go through brief periods of overreaching where you really push so you can get kind of that rubber band snapback effect that we've talked about in powerlifting or Olympic lifting or Olympic sprinting, those sorts of things where they purposely overreach so they can actually get a better effect on comp day. But that's a short-term thing. Over the long term, you don't want to have sessions where the ability to recover is so slow because the sessions are so damaging that it starts to bleed into your other sessions, because one, you're going to increase the chance that you can get hurt because your form isn't going to be very good because you're so sore. And two, you're not going to have very effective workouts because you're so stiff, sore, and essentially burnt out. What's also interesting about this study was, although there's no really way to measure CNS burnout, which people always use that term, and I'm very skeptical about this, but even the people talk about like doing really heavy weights all the time will lead you to get burnt out. Your CNS will get burnt out. There's no evidence of that. And the group that was doing the higher volume and lower weights actually showed more signs of overall fatigue. So I think what this shows is that if you're going to have a heavily damaging session, one, they need to be periodized properly. Two, it can't be so bad that it consistently negatively impacts subsequent workouts. And three, if you're going to schedule a session like that, it should be followed up by a few days of rest and probably some kind of session that's pretty easy to get through after that. That's why Dr. Zordo's, one of his methods of DUP, instead of doing the traditional setup of DUP, which is doing a hypertrophy day, then a strength day, then a power day. Power is low weight, low reps for speed, doing as fast as you can, like 40 to 60% of a 1 rep max for like triples. When you're doing it that way, hypertrophy, strength, power, your hypertrophy day is your most damaging day, and it would negatively impact your strength day. He set it up to where you do hypertrophy, power, strength in that order, because the really damaging session is followed up by a power day, which is low weight just for speed, which even though you may not be fully recovered, you can do that day and not and almost be like an active recovery day. So I thought it was a really interesting study. It really kind of gives credence to what people have been saying about, yes, volume is important, recovery is also important, and you have to periodize appropriately, and you have to progress volume appropriately. I hope this video has been useful for you guys. Definitely check out Mass. Like I said, click the link in the description. It's an awesome publication. You will not regret it. And I'll be doing more reviews of studies like this in the future. Thanks, guys.